Celtic Badass of the Week showcases a different badass person of Celtic heritage each week. Those who exemplify the give no shit attitude and come out on top. They may come from our past or our present, but rest assured they come from all walks of life and legend. They are men, women, even old ladies and pirate queens. You don't have to be a muscled up Celt in a fur kilt swinging a mighty sword. You can just be a 4'11" Welsh woman and suffragette who knows jujitsu. Most of these badasses are all too real. While some may be only legend, badass legends though. The only prerequisite for this title is Celtic blood and badassedness. This week's Celtic badass is Jack Churchill. Now, Jack Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, yeah, he's got 5 names, graduated from Sandhurst Military Academy in 1926. Then he joined the storied Manchester Regiment of the British Army. He spent his first few years in the army riding his motorcycle across the entire Indian subcontinent, just for the hell of it, and learning to play the bagpipes to appease the Scottish part of him. After about 10 years of doing some crazy shit in the army, Jack Churchill retired. In his time off, he worked as a newspaper editor, a professional male model, and a movie extra, all the while honing his skill in archery and bagpiping on the side. He even represented England in the Archery World Championships in 1939. But guys like Jack Churchill are never satisfied with life. So he re-enlisted, and in the early months of 1940, he had his opportunity to prove himself as a distinguished, if not slightly eccentric, officer of the British Army. Now, he had been shipped to France to assist the rest of the British expeditionary force in their mission to reinforce the Maginot Line. Now, not long after Churchill arrived Hitler decided to send his legions to seriously mess up France, and the Brits found themselves right in the middle of a raging shitstorm. Now, the British troops were being pushed back towards the sea by the unstoppable blitzkrieg, doing whatever they could to stall the Germans' relentless advance. Well, Jack Churchill had some ideas. He had not only refused to give ground, but he launched small-scale guerrilla raids and surprise attacks on German positions and supply depots. Riding his trusty motorcycle and armed only with a bow and arrow and a Scottish broadsword, he would assault the Germans, catch them completely off guard, and mess their shit up medieval style. When asked by a fellow officer why Churchill insisted on carrying the broadsword into battle with him, he responded, "In my opinion, sir, any officer who goes into action without a sword is improperly dressed." Now, despite being shot in the neck by a German machine gun, Mad Jack Churchill, as he became to be known, battled through the Dunkirk campaign, at one point even winning the Military Cross for bravery when he rescued a wounded British officer from a German ambush, probably by swinging in on a rope, stabbing a Nazi officer in the chest with his sword, then beating up another 8 guys with his bare hands. But that's just a guess. Now, after Dunkirk, Jack returned to England and promptly signed up to be a member of the new organization known as the Commandos. He wasn't sure what a commando was, but he was sure he wanted to be one. Now, he was excited about the prospect of kicking German asses, so he couldn't resist. He was promptly put through the grueling training regiment of the British Special Forces, and he loved every minute of it. Now, when his training was completed, he took part in daring amphibious assault on a German base in Vasgo, Norway. As the leader of No. 2 Commando, Churchill was responsible for taking out the artillery batteries on Malloy Island. As the landing craft raced towards their LZ, he belted out the March of the Cameron Men on his bagpipes to pump up his men and to prove to everyone how awesome he was. When the assault ramp swung open, he fearlessly waded through knee-deep water out ahead of his men and, with his trusty blade lofted high in the air, screaming, "Commando!" at the top of his lungs. 2 hours later, British High Command received a telegram from the front. Malloy Battery and Island captured. Casualties slight. Demolitions in progress. Churchill out. Now that's badass. During the British landing at Salerno, he won another award for bravery. His squad was charged with taking out an artillery battery that was pinning down a nearby British force. Now, despite the fact that the town of Pigalete, where the guns were based, was garrisoned by a force much larger than his own number 2 commando, well, Churchill was like, forget that. In the middle of the night, he had his men charge the town from all sides, screaming commando as loud as possible. The Germans were confused and surprised and mounted a futile resistance. The 50 men of number 2 commando took 136 prisoners and inflicted an unknown number of casualties. Alright, but that wasn't even the most balls-out thing Mad Jack ever did on a campaign. One night, he single-handedly took 42 German prisoners, captured a mortar crew using his own broadsword. He simply took one patrolling guard as a human shield and then went around from post to post, sneaking up on the guards and then shoving his sword in their faces until they surrendered. Now, his response when asked about how he was able to capture so many German soldiers so easily, he said, "I maintain that as long as you tell a German loudly and clearly enough what to do, and if you're senior to him, he'll cry, 'Jawohl,' which means 'yes, sir,' and get on with it enthusiastically and effectively, whatever the situation. Now, if that's not badass, nothing is." Now, Churchill continued to lead his men into action against the German forces in Yugoslavia, but was eventually captured by the enemy while fighting for .622 on the island of Brac in the Adriatic Sea. Now, when every man in his commando team was killed or wounded and all of his revolver ammunition ran out, knowing that he was not going to escape, and having no further means of killing Nazis, Jack started playing sad songs on his bagpipes until he was finally knocked unconscious by a frag grenade and taken off to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. But it would take more than some freaking concentration camp to hold Jack Churchill. One night in September of 1944, he escaped the camp by crawling under barbed wire and through an abandoned drain. He was later recaptured, though, while walking towards the Baltic coast and shipped off to a prison camp in Austria. Now, this too would prove to be insufficient to hold Jack. However, when the camp lighting failed one night in April 1945, he dropped his shovel and walked away from work detail. He marched 150 miles through the treacherous terrain of the Alps, liberating vegetables he found along the way, until finally he met up with a U.S. armored column and was sent back to England. Unfortunately, the war was pretty much over at this point. He expressed interest in fighting the Japanese, but as his train was pulling into the station in Burma, he received word that the atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima and the Pacific campaign would soon be over. However, Jack's adventures weren't finished yet. At the age of 40, he qualified as a paratrooper and completed jump school. He went on to serve in action in Palestine, where he earned fame for defending a Jewish medical convoy from an Arab ambush, radioing for backup, and providing small arms fire while wearing his full military dress uniform. Another time, he and 12 other men evacuated a hospital full of Israeli medical personnel when they came under attack by Arab rockets. After Palestine, Church went on to serve as an instructor at a land-air warfare school in Australia and became a hardcore surfer. He even designed and built his own surfboards. He retired from the Army in 1959, recipient of 2 awards for bravery. I love eccentric badasses, and Mad Jack Churchill, also known as Fighting Jack Churchill, is about as eccentric as they come. It takes a special kind of badass to carry a bow and arrow into a gunfight, to scream at the top of his lungs in the face of oncoming machine gun fire, and to capture a mortar team using nothing but a sword and a little bit of ingenuity. This guy was always looking for adventure, never backed down away from a fight, and was pretty much insane to the point of being a total badass.